Let's learn about Maya's point-on-poly constraint. The point-on-poly constraint is used to glue an object to a vertex point on a polygonal mesh. So in our case, we're going to take these buttons and constrain them to our character's surface. Let's go ahead and get to work. Underneath the animation module and the constraint menu, we'll choose the point-on-poly tool, and let's go ahead and take a look at its options. So really, there isn't much to choose from. We can add the constraint to an animation layer, and if you like to learn more about how to use this system, we have a tutorial in this reference library series dedicated to working with animation layers and constraints. You could also take a look at our animation layers in Maya course. And then underneath, we can decide what axis we'd like to constrain. Now, this point-on-poly constraint is going to lock down all axes. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. We'll simply select our character's mesh, right-click, and choose vertex mode. I'll just grab the vertex closest to the top button, shift-select the button object, and then choose apply. Alright, so you can see it has snapped to that point. Now, if we were to go ahead and take a look at this, grabbing our control object, what's great is that it's locked down to the deformations of this surface. So if we were working with blend shapes and the blend shapes cause the character's mesh to change, we would see that result in the object we've constrained to our mesh. So this is really neat stuff. Now, if we were to go ahead and undo to before the constraint was made and choose, let's say, just the y-axis to lock down, you can see that the constraint is going to lock down the y-axis of the translate and rotate list of the object we have used as our constrained object, which in our case is this button. So chances are we're going to want to use all axes. So what I'll do is just go ahead and undo to before the constraint was made, and we won't set the constraint just yet because, as you saw, the object shifted to match the position and the orientation of this point. So in order to avoid that from happening, we can work with a stand-in object that the button can then be parented to. So let's go ahead and build that object. Under create, we'll make a locator. Okay, so there's our first locator. Feel free to rename it, which is a good idea. So I'll go ahead and rename this one to LOC underscore button A01. Okay, so we know exactly where that belongs. Let's also scale it down just a little bit more. As right now it's way too large, so we could always go to our scale attributes and set this to 0.1. Feel free to also use the locator's local scale under its shape. But once it's been scaled down, again, the process is we'd first go ahead and grab our point. So I've just selected the mesh. We can right-click, go to vertex mode, select our point, and now go in and grab our locator. If it's hard to grab from the viewport, head over to your outliner and control-click it from here. And now we can go ahead and choose apply. You can see that the locator is snapped to that point. Okay, great. So now, if we were to just go back to object mode, we can now go ahead and grab the button and have that parented to the locator. Before we do that, I'd recommend we duplicate the locator a few more times to take care of the rest of the buttons. So I'll go ahead and duplicate, again, locator A. If it helps, you can always turn on wireframe unshaded to know where to snap the locator to. But now go ahead and grab the surface again, right-click, go to vertex mode, select the next point closest to the button, control-click locator button A2, which we'll need to rename. We can go ahead and apply the constraint. Okay, let's go ahead and grab this locator, rename it to button B01. We can now go ahead and duplicate that. Again, select our surface, right click, go to vertex mode. You can see the next point is hard to grab, so I'll just go to wireframe mode and grab it from here. All right, so with that point selected, again, we can go ahead and select the locator, which is B02, and apply the constraint. Great. All right. Well, let's say we rename this locator. That's C01. And now we can start to parent our button objects. All right, so I'll go ahead and grab button A. You could always do that from the outliner if you'd like. There are two objects that make up this button, so you want to grab the sphere. So with that selected, I'll now parent that to locator A. Let's go ahead and take care of the others. And one more. Okay, great. So at this point, let's go ahead and check out the usefulness of this constraint. As we start to rotate our character's chest around, you can see that the buttons will always stay locked to that surface, which is very exciting, very neat. You can start to translate this as well. Feel free to move the hips. Let's take a look at what happens. Again, those points will stay glued, or the buttons will stay glued to the vertex points we've constrained them to. Okay, so let's say we zero out the hips, zero out the chest, and take a look at a few settings we have in the channel box. So if we were to grab our constrained object, scroll down, what you'll find is that we have offset parameters. So if we need to offset this in the x-axis, the y, the z, same thing goes for rotation, we most certainly can. What's great is that this can all be animated. And then underneath these offsets, we have our weight field. So if we turn that off, the constraint is no longer going to affect our button. You can see it pops to our scene's origin. And then underneath, we have the UV ID of the point that we have constrained to. If you start to mess with these values, of course, the button will shift off of that point, and chances are it's going to pop to your origin. So again, may not want to change any of these values, okay, but they're just there to give you an idea of where this object has been constrained. So that's a look at Maya's point on poly constraint, very useful tool for tying objects to a surface that needs to deform.